call our work session of August 10th to order. We will have a presentation and discussion of staff's recommendations to reimburse eligible costs and consider additional spending for the city's allocation of the federal CARES funding. And then we will also have a presentation and update for the options for the preliminary 2021 budget. So I will pass it to City Manager Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'm going to share a presentation. Oh, I got to get the right one. There we go. So tonight, I'm presenting the staff's estimates of the eligible costs already incurred and then planned to be spent until November 15th on our current level of mitigations. I'm also going to present a plan for additional spending on improved mitigations, mostly focused on direct community assistance and planned reserves to continue to respond to the pandemic. I will also discuss where we're at with the budget in 2021. Please interrupt me with questions and ideas as I go along. There's a lot here tonight. These are big decisions, and staff need your input. So I'll try and look and make sure that if anybody has questions. Oops. So Richfield received almost $2.75 million on July 28th. The federal CARES government, it's 3 basic criteria, and the guidance for the grant is not as specific as we're used to with other federal grants, but both the federal government and the state has provided additional guidance and frequently asked questions. We've also been in touch with other professional organizations like the League of Minnesota Cities to review their guidance, and with our auditors. We will be audited for this because it will trigger the threshold for a common audit called the single audit. So for examples of eligible expenses, personnel is a big one. It's for those job duties that it basically falls into 2 categories. Those job duties that have been changed because they are substantially dedicated to responding to the emergency. And examples are Chief Henthorn in his role as Emergency Management Coordinator, and then Jennifer Anderson, who in her role as Public Health Administrator. But there's also folks like me, and I've been keeping track of my time, also like Assistant City Manager Pam Donatarko, who has been keeping track of her time. And Chief Henthorn early on asked us to do this in case there was additional grant funding. It's very clear, like in the early days of the pandemic, I was 100% devoted to it, but now have averaged about 25% of my time. Also, personnel costs that are eligible are staff that were repurposed. These are for folks that could not do their job because of the mitigations and are now doing their work either differently or in new programs. And a really good example is rec staff that are working as park ambassadors, greeters, or doing the virtual programming. Other examples of eligible expenses are, I've divided them into supplies, technology to provide, to allow our workers to work from home. We've done a lot of signs for folks. And then our Bloomington Public Health contract, because similar to personnel costs, we budgeted for a certain service, and now because of the pandemic, they've entirely had to shift to respond to the pandemic. So staff have tallied all of their expenses that they've spent through 7/31, and then they projected how much they would continue to spend, and this is given current mitigations through November 15th, and November 15th is the end of the eligibility period for the grant. It doesn't have to be spent by then, but it has to be incurred by then. The directors and Chris are still going through this to refine the numbers, but we do believe that we have spent more than what is eligible for the funding already, or expect to spend it by November 15th. And I will pause here for some questions.
Councilmember Supple.
First of all, thank you to staff and everybody. Now, are there like really strict reporting requirements? Like, do you have to report once a month, or how often do we have to turn all this into the federal government?
There are periodic reporting requirements, and I know that Director Regis he's more up to date on that. So I will ask him to answer.
Yeah, it's once a month reporting requirements. In fact, first reporting due date is tomorrow, August 11th, but due to the timing of when we received our funds, we don't have to report until September 11th, I think is the date. So we've got some time. So, but it's once a month.
Thank you.
Councilmember Whalen.
Thank you. Just to clarify, when you say they don't have to be spent, but they have to be incurred, is that just because this is a reimbursement? So we would have to have spent them, and it's okay if the reimbursement happens after 11/15? Or I guess I'm not understanding the distinction.
So if you had ordered a piece of equipment and you've ordered it, but you just haven't received it or paid for it, that would be incurred. If you have a contract for something and they haven't delivered all the services, but you have a contract for it, that would be incurred.
Any other questions? No? All right. I don't think we have any other questions.
Thank you, Mayor. Another really important point is that because these are ongoing mitigations, most of this will go to reserves. And that's going to be really important to bolster our reserves, particularly in the general fund, because we expect 2021 that we will still be continuing to deal with the pandemic and the financial fallout. So even though we expect to be able to take to apply for reimbursement for our costs for ongoing mitigations, we still are proposing new programs, most of them directed at community assistance or more direct community assistance. We would like to do an additional donation to BEEP or a similar nonprofit up to $157,500, and that would be a total of just over $280,000. We also like to do another round of small business assistance, and that would be up to $117,600. We have been told by Bloomington Public Health to reserve up to $500,000 for community testing, but about $50,000 of that is covered in overhead costs. And then I am recommending that we spend up to $100,000 on technology. We currently are allowing employees, because we had to do this so quickly, we're allowing employees to access our system on their personal devices in order to work from home. There is a level of risk to do that. And so I'd like to continue to purchase laptops and provide them with city-owned equipment so we minimize that risk of a cyber attack. I also think that this is important. Our IT department really needs to keep up with the changes in technology in order to recruit and retain staff. So I also recommend, and Director Stark also recommends, that we do the additional direct community assistance for food and rental support and also for small business in a couple rounds in order to be flexible with that. We just don't know how this is going to play out. And so John is suggesting, Director Stark is suggesting that we do another round, but then we wait to see where the need is the greatest, and we could even flex between the two programs. So if there's much more acute need with food and rental assistance, we may shift those dollars there as opposed to for a small business grant. And so also recommending that flexibility. And I'm going to pause there for questions as well.
Oh, yep. I was just going to ask a question. So with our past experience with the money going to VEEP and then our small business assistance, and just hearing from members of the community, I assume that that's not going to be a problem to get that amount of money out the door. Could you explain the long-term care assistance and then the community testing? Is that also kind of a for sure from Bloomington Public Health, or is that an in case of kind of, what do those two items look like?
So it is definitely a reserve. We may not need that, but Bloomington Public Health is concerned because the National Guard is no longer providing the testing, and they are worried that it will fall to the cities. And they want the cities to be aware of this and to have targeted funds so that they can come in and do community testing. I've also talked to Superintendent Yanowski, and he thinks that providing community testing could be a great support for the schools as well. So I expect that we will do some community testing, but if it will be up to the full 500,000, that is yet to be seen.
Got it. Thank you. Any other questions from council members? Councilmember Whalen?
Yeah, thank you. Just to clarify, you said 500,000. So that's combining the community testing and long-term care assistance minus the 50,000 that you mentioned from Bloomington Public Health, right?
So Bloomington Public Health has asked us to reserve up to 500,000, but we're going to have to manage those programs. So there's about 50,000 included in the 150,000. That's for our staff time.
Got it. Okay. But I was just trying to clarify because the numbers you're saying are not the numbers that are on the screen because you're combining things, correct?
Correct. So if you add up the 250,000 for community testing, the 200,000 for long-term care, and then 50,000 out of the 150,000.
Got it. Okay. And then also just wanted to comment that I think the approach with the top two is I really support it. I think the biggest one of the biggest unknowns, I mean, obviously there's the health factor, but in terms of COVID impacts beyond health, I think the biggest unknown is when the eviction moratorium is lifted. What's that going to look like? How many people are at risk of eviction? How quickly are landlords going to want or need to do that? And so I think having this come in rounds is good, and having some flexibility, because I think especially if the eviction moratorium is lifted in like at some point this fall, that having some money set aside to prevent mass displacement of our residents is really essential.
Thank you. Councilmember Supple? Oh, I think you're on mute still.
Thank you. Now that I'm off of mute, I would concur with what Councilmember Whalen said about the rental assistance. And also, if this pandemic goes on long enough, we're going to start having issues with people with house payments and foreclosures as well. And so it's good to have flexibility and figure out how we can help people. Because in the short term, people with mortgages have a little more flexibility, but eventually that also is going to become an issue. So I support having some flexibility.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Councilmember Troutman?
Thank you, Mayor. I just had two quick comments. One in response to actually both kind of in response to us potentially standing in the shoes of the National Guard and the state to support long-term care facilities. And I just it reminds me of how well prepared we were in terms of PPE relative to other cities, because and hat tips to our chiefs, Kiewicz and Henthorn for having a surplus on hand and not being in the hard position that other people were. My question was, or is, in terms of anticipating that, is it just cash that we need in reserves? Are there any things that we need to procure in anticipation of that, or where does that fall on the? I know you can't see into the future, but we have to take action for the future. But if in 90 days or 60 days or 30 days it were to fall on us, would money be enough to get the resources that we need, or is there scarcity now? I'm just, if any clarity in that vein would be really helpful.
You know, I haven't checked with Jennifer on this recently. I would probably have to get back to you to give you a more full answer. On our core calls, I have not heard of a urgent PPE shortage with the long-term care right now. I think the worry right now is that.
Oh, I'm sorry, and I didn't mean just PPE. I just use that as an example because I know if it's
Okay.
testing or other things, I'm not presuming what the need is. I'm just wondering what the scarcity is in general, just illustratively for PPE.
The last update that we got from Jennifer was that because younger folks are out and about and are testing or they're contracting COVID, and those are some of the workers in the long-term care facilities, they're starting to see it come back to the long-term care facilities. So at this point, I think testing is probably the biggest need to make sure that those workers are not going into work if they are sick. But we are still trying to make sure we have a sufficient supply of PPE in case there are any future shortages. And we would probably do that for the long-term care as well.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Doesn't look like it. Okay.
So I'm going to switch now to an update on the 2021 budget, and they are related. We got some, I'll say bad news in the short term about LGA. Because our tax base grew so fast from 2018 to 2019, the 2021 distribution is based on the tax base growth from 18 to 19. Our allocation was knocked down about $360,000. So it puts a hole in our budget in the short term. However, in the long term, it is a much more reliable source of revenue, a growing tax base than LGA. Also, important to note that we do have Ellers working with us so we can better predict any reductions due to a growing tax base. Although it is very, very difficult to predict LGA because the legislature makes changes to the program a lot. They also have a $2.4 billion deficit in the current biennium, and they have a bigger deficit in the next biennium, 4.7, I think. I don't have it in front of me. So there are potentially future LGA cuts on the horizon. We feel that there's less risk with our December 2020 payment. That would be the current biennium, but there's more risk for the 2021, which is the 2 million and change here for 2021. Are there any questions on that? Okay.
Doesn't look like it.
So broad brushstroke, our budget update, we have a lot of opportunities, we have a lot of challenges. The lower LGA means we got a budget deficit. The CARES funding is flowing into reserves, so that is helpful. The state forecast, there's a risk of further LGA cuts, which I just talked about. Also, recent economic indicators have not been great. So we can expect some further financial stress for the city and our community members. Also, COVID-19 doesn't seem to be going anywhere, so probably further disruptions and uncertainty in our budget. Also, with council priorities, I really feel that the 2 new staff positions will help us get there more quickly. So that's just like a broad overview. These are our big tools to solve the budget deficit. Personnel costs are about 71% of our general fund budget. Our property tax levy on the other side, on the revenue side, is about 70%. Reserves are available to stabilize during economic downturns. And again, the CARES funds, because we've incurred all those costs, mostly with budgeted costs, that CARES funding will flow to reserves. So personnel.
Looks like we have a question, Councilmember Sippel.
Before you move on, City Manager Rodriguez, we got a memo earlier today about I believe it was the municipal MSA. is that going to affect mostly the capital accounts, or does that affect the general fund budget? How does that affect us, that that'll be paid later instead of sooner?
Right now, Kristen believes that impact the capital more than the ongoing operations. But it is possible, just like the other revenue impacts, that we could have problems there as well. But not as of right now. Any other questions? So right now we have 2 positions that we're proposing adding, the equity coordinator, possibly to start in 2020, and then a video specialist, which is required if we do implement body cams. Also, we have limited options with personnel in 2021 because we've settled 4 or 5 contracts with our bargaining groups, and we've got a 3% COLA for 2021 and 5% steps. And we have a long history of consistency with all employee groups. We will have more tools in 2022 because we'll renegotiate with our bargaining units, and that will better reflect the economic times that we're in. We will continue to have a soft hiring freeze, and we'll evaluate open positions. So last time there were some questions on the property tax and its impact. And so I'm really glad that Councilmember Troutman asked, and we'll get to that slide in a minute that he specifically asked about. But as you can see here, our market value is growing, and it's mostly growing faster than our levy is growing. And so that is contributing to a falling tax rate. And this is the slide that Director Regis put together that Councilmember Troutman asked for. And again, I think it is helpful to show that there's been pretty modest increases because of the growing tax base. And it's been an average of 1.77% for Richfield's levy. And I think slightly under for all of the combined taxes.
Councilmember Wayland.
Thank you, Mayor. I know I asked this, and I think got an email to me and then an email to the whole council trying to clarify, to further sort of clarify this. If I'm understanding correctly, this sort of sample or example resident, it lives in a $200,000 market value property in 2011. And I guess I'm curious, with just for people to kind of compare, like, where do I fall related to this? Because I think for a lot of folks, the reality is that their home does not just get the normal market value increase. It depends a lot on what they're doing to the home. What then is the market value of this example property in 2020 after the increase each year?
This really wasn't done that way. It was basically, I looked at it each year individually based on a $200,000 market value property, adjusting it for whether the market value increased or decreased for that particular year. So that's how it was done. That, it's that I don't know any other way to do that. So I could have done it simply by taking $200,000 and if there's a market value decrease, done it that way, then took that value and it took either the increase or decrease and worked my way up. But I didn't do it that way. I just took a flat $200,000 for each year and then adjusted it based on whether there's a market value increase or decrease. That's the way it was done.
Does that then mean that each column here accounts for the increase from the previous year, but is not accumulating over the 10-year period?
No, it does not. I took it each year individually. Each year is separate. I took it to $200,000 base value and then adjusted either a decrease or an increase depending on what the market value was estimated that year by the Hennepin County Assessor's Office. not cumulative or anything like that.
I guess I'm not entirely sure then what this graph is telling, or this table is telling us, because I think that cumulative picture is really what we were hoping for, to see, like, and I'm sorry if I'm still misunderstanding what you're saying, but like if the $200,000 market value, I guess I'm looking at a snapshot of one specific property that if it's worth $200,000 in 2011, then in 2012 it is different, and that different number is then what the market value increase to 2013 acts on, so that it becomes cumulative.
It wasn't done that way. I did it, like I said, I took each year, started with $200,000 value, and then adjusted it based on whatever the market estimated market value change was going to be. It's not cumulative. It's basically done on a individual year basis.
Councilmember, we could go back and we could look at the accumulation. The part of the problem though is that depending on the year, commercial and industrial property is valued differently. And so they can, if commercial property, for example, if that market value is increasing faster than residential, then that is going to have an impact on the ultimate taxes that the resident is going to pay. But we can look at this again.
Councilmember Supple?
I don't know. I mean, this is anecdotal and it's just one house. And I didn't count I stopped before we got to the year we did renovations, but when I looked at our house over that period, the property taxes went up by about a third, but that would be including school taxes and city taxes and county taxes and everything. And I don't know if I have a typical house or not, but I thought that was one way to kind of look at it for how much it was going up. But I don't know if that means anything because it's purely anecdotal.
Councilmember Troutman? Looks like you're on mute.
Thank you, Mayor. And I was just saying thank you, Director Regis, because I know this is a tedious project, and I just appreciate you leaning in and helping us understand, and not just for us to understand, but really be able to communicate to our residents some context around these numbers. And I appreciate what Councilmember Supple and Councilmember Whalen shared. And so, you know, like a house, you know, we bought our first family home in Richfield just right around that just before that 2011 time. And so if I'm understanding it correctly, you know, it certainly wasn't worth $200,000 at the time we purchased it, but then it would have been when we sold it. And so if we could look at that kind, I know that's harder to communicate that, but I think that's what I think the average resident really wants to understand is, and I'd love to be able to communicate to them is nothing's absolute. And I know that's, accountants don't want to work, you don't want to work in generalities, you want something very concrete. And so I just recognize that this communication tool is not perfect, but if we could communicate to somebody, if you bought a home and you bought that home for $100,000 10 years ago, and you were paying this amount of tax, now they're going to benefit. They certainly benefit their thousands, or in some cases even more than $100,000 in equity. But what is that? What is the increase on a yearly basis over time? Is any tool, and if we're approaching it wrong, and we're just saying that's not actually a good way, what we're asking for is not a good way to communicate that. I just want to communicate as clearly as I can the context that I'd like to be able to share with residents. So thank you for continuing to look at this, and I'm grateful for this, but would still love more clarity.
Okay.
Any further questions?
I guess clarification. I was just and I don't know if this is honest math or not, but if we're multiplying this times 10, like 1.0177 to like to the 10th power, sorry, not times 10, that then over 10 years is roughly a 19% increase in city taxes. And I think that is maybe the number I was trying to understand and feels a little closer to what Councilmember Supple was saying in her personal experience. Does that sound like, and I guess maybe I can just, I don't know. I guess, so just confirming, I would agree that I need to better understand what we're actually measuring here, because I definitely understand, and the city talks to homeowners every year that when we have a whatever percent, like a 5% tax levy, that does not mean their individual property taxes are going up 5%. I fully understand that, but I don't think, I mean, they're obviously not going up 1.77% over 10 years for some of our residents who have lived here for a while. And so I think the question is that I would like to understand is, over the 10 years, what is maybe the cumulative total percent increase?
So what would you exactly want me to do? You want me to start, because Councilmember Supple's example is a very good example. But if you look at every individual property here in the city, they all have their increases or decreases are different over time and things like that. But what I could do, if this works, I could start with a $200,000 property and start in 2011 and look at the market value change and adjust it accordingly. And then the next year, whatever that new market value is based on the 2011 market value change, I adjust the 2012 market value change to that and calculate the taxes and so forth and go on and go forward like that. Is that something that would make, is that something what you're looking for? And that would be cumulative. I could do that. It'll change the numbers pretty significantly, I think, but I can do that. But one thing too, excuse me, it doesn't take into account anything else other than the market value, and the market value changes because the other information, if somebody's added on to their house or something to that effect, I don't know that information. And so you have to, we have to kind of look at it from that point of view also. But if I can do that, that's not a problem.
Councilmember Supple.
That would be very, very helpful, because I did the same calculation that Councilmember Whalen did without any market value things, and I got the same numbers, but I think the market value also influences it. So if you could take a sample property and do that, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I'll just base it on $200,000 and go forward from there.
Councilmember Troutman.
Thank you, Director Regis. And I don't even know if $200,000 it would have been the average home in Richfield 10 years ago, because I think 10 years ago the average home was probably closer to 150 or even less. But I think that in principle that would be really helpful.
Okay, not a problem.
Any
So
other
sorry.
questions? No other questions.
Thanks, Mayor. So we'll get an updated table for you. So one of our other big tools to solve this budget puzzle is the city reserves, and thanks to Director Regis, he was good about directing any surpluses to this capital reserve fund so it could be used to help us weather the economic downturns And we've estimated here that at the end of 2020, because we will have some of the CARES funding flowing to reserves, that it could be as high as 6 million. The city does have other reserves, including the general fund. A lot of the general fund, though, is to help with cash flow, and it was really the capital reserve fund that was intended and built to help us weather any economic downturns. And I've got some broad options for the budget using these big tools. Of course, there's lots of variations here, but I just wanted to help narrow our conversation and get some feedback from council. So if we had a 5% levy increase and we delayed the body cameras and the video and equity position, it would be about a $270,000 transfer from reserves. If we went ahead and implemented the new programs in the position, it would bump that transfer up to $1 million. I am comfortable with having to tap reserves this year. I mean, I think some of you have said, if there was ever a time to use a rainy day fund, this is it. But I also am cautious that I don't want to take the city to a place where we have a structural operating deficit. So I do want to find a good balance there.
Can I just ask a question? When you have these and you say delay until when? Could you just clarify the timeline on that?
Well, I mean, it's going to depend on the financial condition of the state, and if we get cut with LGA, also our reserves, and what we can negotiate with our unions in 2022. I mean, we will have more options in 2022, but I think we can continue to do the work and to work towards city goals. But I think with these positions, we get there that much faster and more effectively. So I'm torn. I've reviewed it many times, and I come to the same conclusion that I would like to hire these positions. I think it's important for us to progress council goals, but I also want to be really transparent about the financial implications.
Councilmember Supple.
Do both of these options include the fire battalion chief?
Yes.
Given? Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes, the battalion chief was approved in the 2020 budget. They've posted for that position. I think that position is really critical for life safety, and it's also important where Chief Kiewicz is still recovering, and so they're short in the fire department right now. So I think it's important for smooth operations there.
Councilmember Troutman.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to, well, thank you, City Manager Rodriguez, for describing things clearly. And I just want to say for my part, you know, and I appreciate why you're saying, you know, if we implement body cameras, you know, if we make that equity higher, just to be clear from my perspective, there's no if in my mind, that those are absolute imperatives. We don't have a ton of priorities. Those are two. We recognize that they're costs. So I've counted those costs. I'm accountable for those costs. And so what we do, whether that's cutting elsewhere or moving, you know, into the reserves, and I'm one of those council members that said, if this is a rainy day fund, we've had a lot of rain in 2020. so much rain. So much rain, and you know, rain on different fronts, and really giving us the staff to address some of these issues, the equity issues, you know, building accountability that helps both our law enforcement and our community to build trust and build clarity. Like there's just no question. So I understand we have to say if until there's a final vote, but to the extent that I can provide any clarity, I just want to be super clear about that. Yes to rainy days funds, there's lots of rain, and yes to our priorities.
think we can continue to the next options.
Okay, just one point I wanted to follow up on. We are hearing that body cameras may be mandated by the state in 2022, and there may be grant funding available with that. And again, I understand that this is a council priority, but I do want to make you fully aware that we are hearing that that is possible. Given the state's deficit, I don't know if it'll come to fruition, but that is some speculation. The second option is a 5.5% levy increase. Again, delaying the body camera program and the 2 new positions. That would only be just shy of 160,000 transfer from reserves. And then implementing the body cameras and the 2 positions, it would be 353,000. So very manageable with the delay, and more manageable with going ahead with the programs and the new hires. And then with a 6% levy increase, the delay is a very minimal transfer from reserves, and then to implement the program, the new program, and the 2 hires, it's about 240,000 transfer from reserves. And then I'll just show you the impact. So this is what the 3 options would look like compared to past levy increases and dollar amounts. This is the impact on a $250,000 home for 5%. This is the impact $250,000 home at 5.5%. And in red are the increases. And then finally at 6%. So I'll just close with, I think that all the options are reasonable policy options. It has been raining a lot. This is a tough budget year. There are a lot of unknowns. What staff and I have continued to talk about is to try and give the city as much flexibility as possible to be able to respond, because we expect a lot more disruptions, both financial and because of the virus. I do think that a 5% levy and going ahead with the new programs and the new positions, that is, that presents a risk of a structural deficit in the future. I still think it's reasonable. I'm more comfortable with a 5.5% and going ahead with the new program and the positions, or a 6%. And I know this is the council's choice to make, but I would really value your feedback. And then Chris and I can sharpen our pencils and put together a budget recommendation to discuss more fully with the directors on September 10th.
Thank you, City Manager Rodriguez. Any comments or questions from council on the options we just reviewed? Councilmember Whalen.
Thank you. I guess first of all, responding to your comment about body cameras and the possibility of the state mandating and helping fund them. Just to be frank, there's been a lot of things that we maybe could get from the state recently, and I'm hopeful that we'll have some, after the election, we'll have some leadership that's a little bit more committed to following through on some of those things, but we'll see. And so I don't want to count on that. And I think whatever percent, in my mind, whatever percent we pick or recommend, the bottom option on that page is what makes the most sense, that I think we need to move ahead with these increases. I was just, and I know we got these ahead of time, but can you go back one slide? Yeah, so it's a 60-cent difference, 50 or 60-cent difference between each of these percentage points per month in an average on that bottom line. And I know, like we said, that this is an example home. This is not exactly what every resident would experience, but I think I'm in agreement with what City Manager Rodriguez was saying, that I think I'm not terribly comfortable with the level of reserves we'd be drawing on at 5%. not so much because it's too much of our reserves. I think we are at a place where we have a healthy amount of reserves, and I appreciate Director Regis and everyone else who's worked on giving us that stability over the years. But I do think, yeah, given it, I mean, it comes down to taxes have kind of gotten this stigma of being awful, but if we want to have good services, we have to pay for them. And so I think having increasing by that 50 or 60 cents, or even the dollar per month, in the 5.5% option or the 6% option, I think it will set us up to be healthier in the future. And so I would lean toward one of those two. But I know some others are hesitant to go too high. And so if 6 is too high, I'm comfortable with 5.5.
Councilmember Supple.
I would agree that we should fund the to the right slide here, so I'm speaking correctly. We should fund the body cameras and the video and equity positions. I would like to stay somewhere in the 5 to 5.5 range for the increase. I mean, if you could find a way to even do 5.25, I know 5's starting to dip into the reserves, but I do think 6 is too high. So anywhere you can fall between 5 and 5.5 would make sense to me, because as Councilmember Troutman says, it has been pouring rain, and so we do kind of need that rainy day fund. And so I could live with 5.5, but if we could find some way to sharpen the pencils and drop it without hurting our reserves too much, then I think if we can drop it, that would be good, because every little bit counts for our residents as well. Because if you look back at the slide that talks about, let's see, it's the gross levy. I know our tax base has been going up, but we also have, sometimes people don't get that money out of their homes. That's like, they don't have access to it. It's not liquidity. So it is a problem if their taxes keep going up and up and up. So we need to keep that in mind too, because it affects the rents that are charged to people. It affects people's payments for all of their things. So I guess I do want to be cognizant of the fact that the expenses have been going up. I'm glad the tax base is going up and people eventually will get their equity out of it. But in the short term, it's a cash flow thing, and we've got to watch that. So I do not want to go above 5.5. And if we could go a little below that, that would be great.
Thank you, Councilmember Supple. I would agree with the rest of my colleagues around prioritizing, not delaying the 2 positions and really prioritizing that work, because that's, I know on both of those items, we have been having conversations about prioritizing those things for years. And I just think we need to do it. And it sounds like everybody's on the same page with that. I am also comfortable with the 5.5 and the 6% options. I would love to see something between 5 and below 6. You know, if we have to go to 6, I would have that conversation. But if there's a way to keep it under 6, that is what I'm interested in as well. I know that it's been so difficult. I mean, just the CARES, all the work that our staff has had to do to keep tabs on all the money we've been spending in response to COVID, and then prepare the budget for the CARES funding. And then also on top of preparing much more robust and in-depth budget for this coming year. And then making sure we're keeping that flexibility is just, I know that that's been extremely difficult. And I do thank you, City Manager Rodriguez, for sharing that point about finding ways to be as flexible as possible. Because like we've also talked in the past, the decisions that we're going to be making for this coming budget year are really going to, impact how quick of a bounce back we experience, or how slow that is. So I do thank all of the staff, Director Regis, City Manager Rodriguez, the core team for doing some tremendous work, not just in one area, but multiple layers upon layers of really difficult work this year. And I know these decisions are very hard, but I appreciate the space and the time you've been giving us to really have these difficult conversations and really get the input from staff and the feedback from council, because we are all going to have to be leading together, and there is so many unknowns, like you said. So hopefully that helps. I feel strong between 5 and 6, and I wish we had Council Member Garcia with us, but unfortunately we don't. Are there other slides, City Manager Rodriguez, or additional direction that you would need from us?
No, thank you. I don't have further slides. I appreciate your questions and your feedback. It is very helpful.
Great, thank you. Oh, Councilmember Supple.
I just thought I saw Councilmember Troutman raising his hand, so I might be wrong, but I didn't want him to get missed.
Oh,
And I'm not seeing him on the
Councilmember
screen.
Supple.
Oh, there you go. Sorry, go ahead, Councilmember Troutman.
No, thank you. I mean, I kind of commented before the question was put to us, but with regards to hoping that the state will come through and deliver at a later date, that I think we only put our hopes there when we have to, absolutely. I think Councilmember Supple captured my thoughts and feelings, almost precisely. So I would just echo her comments. But Councilmember Whalen, just align with him completely when it comes to hoping that delaying under any circumstance the body cams, and in hopes of the state government coming through.
City Manager Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mayor. And I just want to be clear, Chief Henthorn and his command staff and officers fully support doing body cams in 2021. But I did want to be completely candid with all the information that we're getting, and that there is a chance that in 2022 that it could be mandated and there could be associated funding. But I appreciate all the feedback.
Great. Any last questions or comments from folks before we adjourn our meeting? Councilmember Supple.
Okay, thank you. So if we go ahead and budget for the body cameras, can you do a retroactive grant from the state? Could we be reimbursed? And so it'd be kind of nice extra money at some point, or pretty much we're just gonna, it would have to be a first time for expenditure. I'm just curious, because I do support going forward with the body cameras this year, and I think we should do it. I'm just wondering if there's a possibility of a windfall next year.
Councilmember Supple, I have yet to see a grant program that would provide funding if you already have it in place. I mean, it's possible, but I doubt it. But I can get back to you with more information.
Councilmember Whalen.
Thank you. To clarify, the potential grant program would be for the technology costs, not for personnel? Or would it be for both?
That's my understanding, but again, I'd have to get back to you on the details. I don't even think this is the state has rolled this program out. There's just some talk about it.
Okay.
Director Regis, do you have more details on that?
No, I don't have any details on it. And it wouldn't be till 2022 anyway. That's the only thing I understand. So we'd have to wait a full entire year at least. And I agree with you, City Manager, that I don't think, there's no grant programs out there or that you've already got the items or the equipment that they're going to reimburse you for. I mean, if it comes after the fact that we're just kind of out of luck and we've already made the purchase and we're moving on our way and stuff. So.
Any additional questions or comments from folks? Sorry, I keep flipping back and forth to see the screens. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much to all of our staff, to Director Regis, City Manager Rodriguez. This has been a tremendously difficult year in so many ways. And just with the budgeting alone this year, we appreciate all the hard work that you're doing and the space that you're providing for the council to really get much more in the weeds with you on these things, have a much better understanding of, what the potential barriers are, what the opportunities are, and try to have the most flexible plan for our uncertain future. Thank you, everybody. I'll adjourn this meeting and I will see you for our council meeting.